Okay, this chapter looks at mass murder in schools. So more than a few students feel alienated and frustrated and have identified with the power of school shooters. This is the foundation of what's known as a copycat phenomenon. This effect is short-lived, causing a number of similar attacks to be committed over a limited period of time. The image that the killers create is one of power and dominance. So for instance, the Columbine shooting was plotted for more than a year. Harris likely enjoyed the respect and admiration of Klebold, who probably felt uplifted by the praise he received from Harris. In the 90s, most school shooters were white boys in small towns. Schools can breed feelings of inadequacy, anxiety, fear, hostility, rejection, and boredom. And school can also be a place logistically and symbolically where they can, quote unquote, settle the score. As early as the 60s, before concern about school shootings, schools occasionally had police officers assigned to them as a special form of community policing. But this doesn't necessarily deter a shooting. There were officers present at Columbine that day, and there were officers present at the Parkland shooting more recently. Effective school resource officers typically walk the corridors, they make connections and provide educational programs. Since Columbine, schools have what are called lockdown drills, and this reinforces the notion that school is dangerous, and the psychological harm caused by it is not always warranted. So it's one thing to prepare faculty and staff, and another thing to practice with kids. Perhaps adults should really be trained, and the kids should be instructed or trained to listen to the adults in one of these emergencies. Chronic bullying is frequently cited as an underlying cause. Case profiles of 15 assaults and 13 incidents found that 73% had been victims of bullying and persecution. But keep in mind, with any study, we're talking about 15 assaults, 13 incidents here. This could be something, if we were to look at a wider range of assaults and incidents where the numbers might be different. But bullying alone is not going to lead to this. We need to have poor coping skills to produce this extreme response. So about 71% of attackers felt rejected and isolated by their peers. 64% had poor coping skills. 64% demonstrated an exaggerated need for attention. 24% abused alcohol and drugs, and 10% were non-compliant with their medications. Poor coping skills in turn may be related to weak social bonds to friends and family, and if there's no support at home, the toxic school environment will be amplified. So we can often see poor family relationships in the choice of targets. So Woodman, Kinkle, Weiss, and Lanza all killed parents or grandparents prior to their school rampage. And the personal nature and overkill suggested that there were strained relationships at home. The majority of thwarted school shootings were avoided because students informed authorities about a threatening remark. And this is often referred to as leakage. It's the intentional or unintentional revelation of clues to feelings, thoughts, fantasies, or intentions that may signal impending violent acts. It could be subtle threats, boasts, predictions, and it could be through stories, essays, drawings, and they can vary in how specific they are. So this can happen in colleges as well. Robert Flores Jr. was facing academic withdrawal from the University of Arizona Nursing School, and he set out to execute nursing faculty that he blamed for his failures. He shot the professor, students, and then killed himself. And prior to the killing, he mailed a letter to the local newspaper titled, "Greetings from the Dead." He writes, "To the sociologist, it wasn't the Maryland sniper. I have been thinking about this for a while. To the psychiatrist, it's not about unresolved childhood issues. It's not about anger because I don't feel anything right now. To Ellen Goodman, it is not about gun control. I have had guns for a long time and it was my trade in the military. I do not have gun magazines. A waiting period or owner registration would not have stopped me. I have a concealed carry permit, but I have never brought a gun to the university until now. I was a Boy Scout. I crossed the street at the crosswalk. It is not about revenge, as I have always thought revenge was a waste of time and energy. I guess what it is about is that it is a reckoning, a settling of accounts. The university is filled with too many people who are filled with hubris. They feel untouchable. Students are not given respect nor regard. It is unfortunate that the only force that seems to get any attention from the university is economic force." Efforts have been made to form threat assessment and management teams, and we also often overlook graduate students. They often lack a balance in their personal lives and are narrowly focused on their studies. In the past, they've always been the top students, but now amongst all the top students, they may no longer be in the top. And some faculty maintain oppressive relationships with grad students, increasing all of that stress. Many people think violent video games play a role, with 62% of Americans feeling this way and 83% supporting restriction of sales of violent media to children. 60% of shooters did display an interest in violent media content, but there's no direct causal link here. In fact, it's probably more likely that violent individuals are attracted to violent media. The copycat effect is very popular in the media, but isn't really well studied by scholars. So it's not clear whether a jump in reported threats after Columbine is an actual increase in threats or an increase in reporting. And the copycat effect is not so much about the nature of the crime, but the extent to which it's covered. So after Cho, killed people at Virginia Tech, NBC released the photos and videos that he had mailed. That contagion effect is even more profound when the imitator shares some characteristics with the model. Attempts to prove this copycat effect through anecdotal evidence don't always lead to solid conclusions, though, that we can generalize to the larger population.